Okay, so recap. Last week we talked about belonging to His body, the church, and how it's central to God, and how for us it means fellowship and wisdom and accountability and ministry and corporate worship. So tonight we want to talk about stewarding His gifts. We're going to spend most of our time talking about resources, stewarding His resources. If we get to it, we'll talk about stewarding time. We kind of already hit on that in session 1. And then stewarding His gifts that He's given us will be the focus of next week. So tonight we will talk about stewarding His gifts. A lot of people give preachers a bad rep for always talking about money. I don't know about you, but in my experience, it's never talked about, actually. Maybe it was a generational thing, but it seems to me nowadays everybody's scared to talk about, pastors are scared to talk about money, but it is a big deal in the Bible, which is why we're going to spend the whole session in spiritual formation talking about it. It's just all over the place. So my take is if pastors are being faithful to the Bible, they're going to be talking about this issue quite a bit, again, because it's in the Bible. Not making it a hobby horse and not padding their own pockets and that sort of thing, but just teaching what the Word teaches. Why do you think the Lord asks us to give? I don't have a right answer in mind to that question.
Where your treasure is, there will be your heart. Right?
Getting ahead of us, John.
Oh.
Yeah, where your treasure is, there your heart will be.
It's His to begin with.
It is to begin with.
The same reason He asks us to serve. It's giving something we have. It's sacrificially.
Sacrifice, yeah. Yep.
As a body, we're called to help each other and love one another, and sometimes that means financially, and that's just the resources that we tap. Right?
Yeah, called out.
I think and that kind of gives us a picture of like what Christ does for as we're sacrificially giving, like reminding like His sacrifice, and we're being able to be a witness in that way to other people.
That's good. Those are all answers where we're going tonight, so right on. I think part of the reason why we're not spiritually formed fully in America, you think about what are like the main idols of our culture. Every culture's got different idols. They all got them. And one of the main, well, what do you think? What are some of the main idols of current day American culture?
Entertainment.
Cars, house.
Hmm?
Cars, houses.
Yeah, stuff.
Yeah, stuff.
Fame,
Fame.
money,
Money.
Power.
Power.
Ease.
Ease. And sex, right? Sex is a big one. Sexuality. But so one of them was mentioned lumping money and power and stuff together. They just call it materialism. The idea that stuff defines us and makes us happy. That's a big one where we're at. It's bigger than I think we all realize, right? We're all in it. It's the air we breathe. We're all rich compared to most of the world and most of history. So materialism's a big idol that presses upon us. I think part of the reason we're not formed spiritually is we're weighed down by it. Our values are tied up with stuff. Our values are tied up with the here and now rather than the there and then. So that's why we're talking about stewarding His gifts. It's not ours. He owns it all. And that's the key. That's the key to beginning to live generous lives, is seeing ourselves as stewards rather than owners over all things, not just money and stuff, time, everything. We're here. It's all His. It's all for Him. And we are to steward. What's the difference between a steward and an owner?
A steward manages.
What?
Steward manages.
Manages. That's great. That's a great way to put it. Steward manages on behalf of the owner. And we all get that. It's a very clear, distinct. The steward manages on behalf of the owner for the owner's benefit, finds out what the owner wants done with it, and carries out His will. And again, it's all His. Just a few Psalms. Psalm 50, verse 10. It says, every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And so it's all His. And in the Old Covenant, even with like, you think about, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but the Sabbath and every 7 years and the year of Jubilee, really God wouldn't allow people to get too wealthy. He just wouldn't in the Old Covenant. Now it's different. The Old Covenant was a theocracy. It's different than the church. But you could gain so much, and then you push reset. It was a different world, right? And then even the tithes. So just think about the old covenant tithes. We say tithe, it's 10%, but it's really a misnomer because we have the Levitical tithe, what we could call it. Take care of the Levites. You have the tithe for the festivals to be able to pull off the feast. You have a tithe for the poor, which was 10% every 3 years. So doing the math, we'll call that 3.3% per year because it was a tithe every 3 years. That doesn't mention the voluntary tithes like the first fruits offering or the free will offering. So if you do the math, an old covenant tithe was about 23%. Again, not including the extras, required 23% in the old covenant. Now, what's the difference between the old covenant people of God and the new covenant people of God? There's more than one right answer. What are some of the differences? One way to say that's between Israel and the church. Old covenant people, new covenant people.
We're not under the law.
Not under the law. What else? Have the Spirit. Permanent indwelling of the Spirit. The Spirit was active, obviously, and around in the Old Covenant, but He never permanently indwelled Israelites. He would come upon them at certain key times and places to do certain tasks. And so He would come upon priests, or he even came on, remember in Exodus, Bezalel, to build the tabernacle, and then He left. So He wasn't permanently indwelt in any Old Covenant believer. That's why David can pray in Psalm 51, Lord, take not your Spirit from me. That's not a New Covenant reality. In the New Covenant, we're sealed. We are indwelt permanently as we trust in Jesus. That's a big difference. You, as a Christian, have the indwelling Spirit. You have the power to obey. An Old Covenant believer didn't. That's a big one. What else? I'm looking for one main one. Difference between Old Covenant people and New Covenant people. We celebrate it every month in communion. Full and final forgiveness of sins. Again, they had the whole sacrificial system. So every year they're bringing animals, and the blood of bulls and goats doesn't take away sin. Jesus Christ, final, it is finished, full and final forgiveness of sins. So those are the two big differences. They didn't have the Spirit and they didn't have the gospel. Now, they're looking forward to it. So, question we got to ask ourselves, do you think God expects His New Covenant children to give more or less than His Old Covenant children? Ouch. Jesus spoke more about material possessions and money than He did about heaven, hell, sexual morality, violence. 15% of everything He taught relates to this topic. More than His teaching on heaven and hell combined. Jesus talked about stuff, wealth. Flip over to Matthew chapter 6, Sermon on the Mount. I spent a lot of time in the Sermon on the Mount in this class. I want us just to walk through some key passages, kind of like we have been. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Jesus says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." So notice the logic there, especially in verses 19 to 21. Don't focus, don't lay up treasures here because it's not going to last. He's really wanting us to be wise investors. If you know it's not going to last, it's either going to be destroyed or going to be stolen, why would we focus everything there? Rather, we should lay up treasures in heaven where it can't be destroyed and where it can't be stolen. Jim Elliot says, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Such a good quote. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. He's really reflecting on this passage. Because you're going to lose everything in this world, all the stuff, right? You can't take it with you. The cliches, right? You've never seen a U-Haul behind a hearse. John Rockefeller was asked how much, his assistant, how much did he leave behind? Every bit of it. We leave it behind. We can't take it with us. He who dies with the most toys wins. Well, not really. They still die, and the toys stay here. Usually, kids fight over it. So we can't take it with us. That's what Jesus is saying. You can't take it with you, but you can move it on ahead. That's Alcorn's language. You can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. And then he gives us the reason for, verse 21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This is some of the most insightful teaching, in my opinion, that Jesus gives us. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And we all know this. Money leads, hearts follow. And so when we find ourselves frustrated, I wish I had more of a heart for fill in the blank. Start giving to fill in the blank, and your heart will follow. Wanted more of a heart for missions. Start giving to missions, your heart will follow. For local church, up your giving, your heart will be in. Money leads, heart follows. That's what Jesus says. Wherever it is, that's where we go. And you understand this when you buy new things. I wish I should have thought more about a personal illustration here. But you will be able to relate. When you buy some new thing, a car is probably the best example. You got your car, it's your old beater. You drive, you don't think about it. You drive it, it gets you there. You park, you just don't care. Like today, I took Alicia, we had to be able to get a lunch date. I took her to the Shed. Have y'all been over to that little area down south? Shed's the best brisket in Abilene, in my opinion. But have you tried to park in those slots? They're like 6-foot little things. So I couldn't even fit our car in there. So I don't care though. I'm pulling in. Say I get a new car. I'm not parking that close to that car. I don't want that car. I don't want that car. Some kid, the wind blow up and ding my new car. And so you'll get a new car and you park like way out in the back of the parking lot. You wash it all the time. You got to then buy accessories for it. You got to insure it. You're thinking about it more. Or even a new phone. I got a new phone recently, so okay, now I got to get the screen cover. I got to get the case. I got to make sure I've got the accessories for it. And we end up being focused on whatever we spend money on in ways that we weren't before. We got to keep it clean. We got to repair it. We got to rearrange. We got to protect, accessorize, and then replace. So wherever we're investing financially, our heart and therefore our whole lives is invested in it. That's what Jesus is teaching here. Here's what John Wesley said. Wesley said, "Money never stays with me, and it would burn me if it did. I throw it out of my hands as soon as possible, lest it should find its way into my heart." And Wesley was a faithful, radical example of good stewardship. So don't lay it up here because it's going to be gone. You're going to lose it. It's going to be destroyed. But you can send it on ahead and it's going to be safe and secure. And in the meantime, we want to train our hearts. Well, give. Any examples of, in your own life, that kind of scenario where you've given and your heart has followed? Good or bad?
I think when you first start tithing, and try to be faithful with it, it's not always easy at first, but if you're ready, if you can do it regularly, then you don't even think about it after a while.
Yeah. We get invested in that which we invest in. All right, flip over to 1 Timothy 6. And again, one of the reasons why we're talking about this, and I think why Jesus talks about it so much, is it shows where our heart's at. The way we use our resources shows where our heart's truly at. People say oftentimes, you can say what you want. I can show you your God by looking at your checkbook. Or Luther, a little bit crass, which Luther often was, said, how can you know if someone's a Christian? Well, by the way they handle their zipper and their wallet. A lot of truth in that statement. 1 Timothy 6, verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. Notice the key here is not money. It doesn't say money is the root. We need Christians who make a lot of money. It says the love of money is the root. People say it's not about possessions, it's just do they possess you? The love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pangs. Skip down to verse 17. So just notice the warning there. And again, every one of us is rich. Every one of us has more than one pair of shoes. Relatively speaking, I think the vast majority of Americans fall into this. And it's a warning. And especially if you desire it, just be warned. It's a temptation. It's a snare. Its desires will plunge you into ruin and destruction. It leads to all kinds of evils. So look down at verse 17. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. So it's not like God's some joy kill. That's the whole point. He actually wants our joy. He just wants it in Him. And He knows by living generous lives, that's the key to the good life, the joyful life. Verse 18, they are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasures for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. So helpful. Be rich in good works. Be ready to share. Flip over back to your left a few books to Ephesians 4 and see something similar. Look at Ephesians 4, verse 28. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he might have a fat 401k, so that he might have that second house, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. You ever think about your work that way? Do you think about, I'm going to work? That's all this verse says. There's a whole lot more to say, and we don't have time to get into Proverbs and talk about the fact that it's wise to have savings and leave a legacy and all that. We're not talking about, vows of poverty or poverty theology, anything like that. But just notice, we all need to be pressed on this some, I think, in America. The only thing it says here about work is so that we would have something to share. Probably most of us don't think about that at all in our work. But here it is, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. And so is that on your radar at all? You try to think about how can I have a little bit of extra income so when the need comes, I'm ready to give. Flip over, so we're in Ephesians, flip over to the next book, Philippians chapter 4, to your right. And notice we're going to see giving is an act of worship. Southside, we don't pass the plate, and I actually like that. That was that way before I got here, but the benefit of passing the plate in a service is it does make it more clear that this is an act of worship. What do? Well, we pray together, we sing together, we hear the word, but also we give together, and that's an act of corporate worship that I think has biblical roots. We'll see. Philippians 4:18. I've received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. A fragrant offering. So financially providing for the mission. How does he describe those gifts? It's a fragrant offering. I think that's old covenant language, right? That's an offering of an animal at the temple language. And now he spiritualizes to talk about when we give. So when you write that check or do the direct deposit or however you might give, think of that. As you do that, that's a fragrant offering to the Lord. It's an act of worship saying, this is yours, I'm here to honor you, and here is my offering. A sacrifice. And again, we hear that word and we don't realize. Remember, a sacrifice is a bloody goat, a bloody bull. Here it's talking about our gifts. A sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. God is pleased as we give sacrificially. It's a fragrant offering to His nostrils. Flip over to the right a few books to the book of Hebrews. Chapter 13, Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13:5 says this, keep your life free from the love of money. It's a commandment for the church. We need to keep our lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For He has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Look down at verse 16. Another worship passage. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Again, when we meet needs, when we give to the local church, it's a sacrifice that pleases the Lord. And so giving is an act of worship. And as someone mentioned, giving then is also based upon grace. It's a parable of grace, of what Jesus has done for us. The best chapters here, anybody know them? Probably the best chapters on giving, clearest, most helpful chapters on giving in the New Testament. There's 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. Flip over there. I think what we'll do is walk through the bulk of. I think we'll walk through the bulk of these two chapters real quick. And I'll emphasize it, but he uses the word grace several times here. And he also uses the word brother several times in these chapters. It's used 12 times in the letter, the whole letter, this idea of a family, brothers and sisters. And 6 of them are in these chapters. The idea is they're expressions of the family, sibling solidarity. So let's walk through it. 2 Corinthians 8. We want you to know, brothers, there it is, we're a family here, about the grace of God. This is where we get the idea of grace giving, these chapters. That has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy. Notice that these things normally don't go together. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. Talk about a witness. Verse 3, for they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the grace of taking part in the relief of the saints. And this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. Accordingly, we urged Titus that as he had started, so he should complete among you this act of grace. But as you excel in everything, in faith and speech and knowledge and all earnestness, and in our love for you, see that you excel in this act of grace also. Still talking about giving. I say this not as a command, but to prove by the earnestness of others that your love also is genuine. For you know the grace, man, this is the verse right here. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, by his poverty, might become rich. What's a motivation for giving? The cross. Look at Christ. He had everything he needed. What did he do? He gave it up for our sake, so that we, by his poverty, might become rich. Verse 10. And in this matter I give my judgment. This benefits you, who a year ago started not only to do this work, but also to desire to do it. So now finish doing it well, so that your readiness in desiring it may be matched by your completing it out of what you have. For if the readiness is there, it's acceptable, according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but that as a matter of fairness, your abundance at the present time should supply their need, so that their abundance may supply your need, that there may be fairness. As is written, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. But grace be to God, same word used here, translated several different ways, who put into the heart of Titus the same earnest care I have for you. For he not only accepted our appeal, but being himself very earnest, he's going to you of his own accord. With him we're sending the brother who is famous among all the churches for his preaching of the gospel. And not only that, but he's been appointed by the churches to travel with us as we carry out this act of grace that is being ministered by us for the glory of the Lord himself and to show our goodwill. We take this course so that no one should blame us about this generous gift that's being administered by us. For we aim at what is honorable, not only in the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of man. And with them we're sending our brother, whom we have often tested and found earnest in many matters, but who is now more earnest than ever because of his great confidence in you. As for Titus, he's my partner, fellow worker for your benefit. As for our brothers, they are messengers of the churches, the glory of Christ. So give proof before the churches of your love and our boasting about you to these men. Twice he mentions that their giving is evidence of their love. And he's appealing to the fact that they are brothers and sisters, even though they're not local. They may not even know most of them. Chapter 9. Now it's superfluous for me to write to you about the ministry for the saints. For I know your readiness, of which I boast about you to the people of Macedonia, saying that Achaia has been ready since last year, and your zeal has stirred up most of them. But I'm sending the brothers so that our boasting about you may not prove empty in this matter, so that you may be ready, as I said you would be. Otherwise, if some Macedonians come with me and find that you are not ready, we would be humiliated, to say nothing of you, for being so confident. So I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to go on ahead of you to arrange in advance for the gift you have promised, so that it may be ready as a willing gift, not as an exaction. The point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. As it is written, he has distributed freely. He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be, so that you will be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. For the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but is also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. By their approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel of Christ and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others. While they long for you and pray for you because of the surpassing grace of God upon you, thanks, grace, be to God for his inexpressible gifts. Man, there's so much there. Notice that last verse there in verse 13. By their approval of this service. So this gift, your generosity, giving, it'll cause people to glorify God. Why will they glorify God? Because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel of Christ. If we confess the gospel of Christ, part of that means it should issue in generosity. And the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others. So what an example we have. Even though they are broke, they are persecuted, but they beg them earnestly for the grace of taking part. Hey, we're broke, but out of our poverty, could we please help these saints that we don't even know, these Jerusalem saints? What an example. So there again, we see all that tied together. It's an act of grace. It overflows from the gospel. If we've experienced the gospel, we ought to be generous. It worships God, it honors him, and it helps the saints, helps those in need. Could say a lot more, but let's keep moving. Let me stop. Any comments, questions, clarifications on any of that? All right, let's get a little bit practical. How then? How then should we give? I think number one, systematically. George Mueller said, are you giving systematically to the Lord's work, or are you leaving it to feeling, to impression made upon you through particular circumstances or to striking appeals? If we do not give from principle systematically, we shall find that one brief life is gone before we are aware of it, and that in return we've done little for that adorable one who bought us with his precious blood and to whom belongs all we have and are. I think he's right. Just like with reading the Bible and praying, we ought to have a plan. We ought to have a systematic plan. If we just think, I'll give when I feel like it, or when I feel the Spirit leading me, we'll end up dying having not given much. So give systematically. I agree here with Randy Alcorn. Here's what he says. He says tithing, 10%, isn't the ceiling of giving. It's the floor. It's not the finish line of giving. It's just the starting blocks. Tithes can be the training wheels to launch us into the mindset, skills, and habits of grace giving. And you may be like, what? 10% is the beginning point? I'm nowhere near there. And listen, if that's you, sadly, you're not alone. All the statistics say the national average percentage of giving by evangelical Christians is, take a guess. Anybody know? They're all around, several studies say about the same percentage of their income. It's 2.6 is the number that comes up regularly. 2.6. And studies show that the richer you get, the actually less the percentage is, even among evangelical Christians. So the goal then, I think, is if you're not there, get there. Get to 10%. Again, Old Covenant was 23%. And if you're not there, start working to get there. There's a story told of a preacher who visited a farmer and he said, if you had $200, would you give $100 of it to the Lord? The farmer said, I would. If you had 2 cows, would you give one of them to the Lord? Sure. If you had 2 pigs, would you give one of them to the Lord? And the farmer said, now that's not fair. You know I have 2 pigs. The point is to begin, and to begin systematically. So give systematically. We'll say a little more about that in a minute. Give regularly. 1 Corinthians 16:2 says, on the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. So there was an early habit pattern of the first day of the week, Sundays, the Lord's Day, was when the church would give systematically, regularly, and here's where it hurts, sacrificially. What does that mean? All Christians should give sacrificially.
It makes me think about before we got married in our premarital counseling, our college pastor who married us, who was also his cousin. Anyways, he used his own personal life as an example, saying, like, the more money you make, 10% might not be very much of a sacrifice. Like, it might not hurt at that point to be giving. And so, like, he and his wife personally had decided when they got married, they would up it by 1% every year they were married. And at that point, at least, that was 11 years ago, they had done that. And I still remember that. Like, that is pretty awesome. So.
Yeah, definitely.
We can't afford that.
Well, I think though that when they got married, they did start at 10% because they just flat out couldn't afford it or something. So they had but they had gone up every year at least. So.
They didn't start at like -30, did they?
I don't know what they started at, but.
They're taking money out of That's another good reason not to pass.
To give sacrificially means we'll have to say no to something, doesn't it? It means we give till it hurts, or give when it hurts. C.S. Lewis said this, if our expenditures on comforts, luxuries, amusements, etc., is up to the standard common among those with the same income as our own, we're probably giving away too little. If our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say they're too small. There ought to be things we should like to do and cannot do because our charitable expenditure excludes them. So that's the idea of giving till it hurts. It's what the very word sacrifice means, right? I would submit the vast majority of American Christians do not give sacrificially. So give systematically, give regularly, give sacrificially, and that looks different for every person. You know, it just looks different for every person. 10% could not be anything for somebody. Think about the widow and the mite. And then give cheerfully. Speaking of systematically and sacrificially and that kind of mindset, what do we typically do? Let's say we get a raise. What do we typically do? Just raise our standard of living, right? Our first thought is us. Hey, now I can afford. And so I really like those folks that have a set standard. And you know what? That's what we need, and we're staying there. And we're just going to do that kind of thing of when I get a promotion, I'm not going to raise my standard of living. I'm going to keep it as it is. He calls us to give cheerfully. We saw that in 2 Corinthians 9:7. God loves a cheerful giver. Jesus says that, and that's quoted in Acts 20. It says that it's more blessed to give than to receive. I just think we don't believe that. It's more blessed to give than to receive. But every one of you can relate to that, though, right? When you've been able to bless somebody, isn't it like the most awesome thing to be able to give and bless somebody? It's just so cool to be a part of it, right? It really is blessedness. Again, that word blessedness is happy. That's what the word means. You want to be happy? You're going to be happier giving of self than receiving. It's the way we were made because we're patterned after Jesus. To go back to that first week, conformity to the image of Jesus. He's the true image. He's the true human. He is what we're supposed to be. And to be like him is one who gives of self all the time. It's what he does. It's the good life to be able to give. Why do you think God cares about the posture of our heart in giving? He could just say, I demand you to give. But he wants a cheerful giver. He wants blessings. Why do you think he cares about our heart instead of just our action?
Because our heart says how we really feel about him.
It's easy to fake it with a hand, but our heart's it's kind of what he said to the Pharisees, right? You worship me with your lips, your hearts are far from me. So externally you can do some things, but have hearts that are far from it. Why else? What do you care about the posture of our heart instead of just flat out duty?
Because it shows the world, when we give cheerfully, it shows the world that we truly love our brothers and sisters, and that's how that Bible says that they will know you are Christians by your love. So, love for one another.
As a witness, yeah, it's good.
So Jesus sacrificed himself with joy, like for the joy set before him. Like he took up the cross for us. And so, like if we're conforming ourselves to him, like this should be something that we enjoy doing. We'll find satisfaction in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned today I was able to take Alicia to the shed, and say I would have dropped her off after the short lunch date. And hey, thanks. She says, hey, thanks for taking me on a date. And I said, yeah, it's my duty. I'm your husband. Or if I say, you know what, it is my pleasure to take this hour and be able to spend it with you. Which one is she more honored in? Clearly the second, right? Same with the Lord. You know, it's one thing, okay, golly, 10%, here you go, versus 10%. Lord, use it, bless somebody. And so the posture of our heart honors him more when we give from a cheerful heart, when it's our joy to give. So God is most, again, we mentioned session one, Piper's famous quote, God is most glorified in us when we're most satisfied in him. He wants all of us. He wants his own glory too. So he gets more glory when we give joyfully than when we give begrudgingly. So that's part of it as well. So how do you get here? Well, man, if you don't budget, I think it's one of the best first practice. Maybe there's no other takeaway. If you don't budget your money, this would be the best takeaway from here is start a budget. Because if you don't know where your money's going, and if you've never done it or it's been a while, it will be shocking, I guarantee you, on finding out where your money's going. Our favorite tool is an app. It's free. It's called Every Dollar. It's by Dave Ramsey and those guys. You can go old school. There's all kinds of tools on the web, but Every Dollar is nice because it's on your phone. And let me challenge you here. I wasn't planning on doing this, but let me just challenge you to budget for the next month. Budget for 30 days. That way you know where every penny goes. With Every Dollar, you go on everydollar.com, I think, and you set up your categories. So you set up, your everything. You set up every little line item. Bills and expenses and vacation and medical and every category. So you set it up online for free once you make an account, and then you download the app. And so on your phone, as you spend it, because if you don't do it there, your receipt's not going to make it home half the time. So if you plug it in right then and there, I spent it, let me plug it in. I think you'll be shocked at where your money goes and where it adds up. So that's one of the main ways, if you're not a systematic giver, is get a budget and know where your money goes. And I'd say work. If you're not towards 10%, work towards there. I think it's a great place to be, great place to start. And in terms of categories of giving, I think we can make a biblical case that first and foremost, local church. Second, other believers or other missions or other organizations you may believe in. And then third, the world. Base that partly off of Galatians 6:10, do good to everybody, especially the household of faith. So I think that ought to be the kind of trajectory of where we use our resources and our time. It is local church, broader church, world. Dave Ramsey, I think, is onto something with his stuff. If you've never taken Financial Peace, it's worth doing. Well, actually, Alicia and I have actually never taken the class, but we've kind of inherited it. And so if you don't know his baby steps are, number one, save $1,000. If you don't have anything in savings, save $1,000. It's kind of an emergency fund. And baby step number two is start working on your debt. Get out of debt. And his philosophy doesn't make sense with numbers and paper, but it does because of human nature. And his philosophy is start with the smallest debt first. So you've got big debt you're paying every month. It doesn't make sense to start small. And, you think. But the psychology behind it is you knock off that $200 debt, you've got motivation to go, and it encourages you to do it. So the debt snowball, he calls it, starting with your smallest debt, working towards your largest debt. Next step is try to save 3 to 6 months of savings so that you just have that buffer. And then he talks about focusing on retirement. His aim is 15% of your income going to retirement and college funding. And then your last thing is, not your last, then pay off your home early, and then his thing is build wealth and give generously. So those are pretty proven steps as a goal to get there. And man, you'd be surprised. Alicia and Alicia's always stayed home, always been a pastor, and how much he's provided for us. We just started early on, kind of do this. We're going to get out of debt. We had some student loans, and just to give right off the bat, whether we can afford it or not. And the Lord has just taken care of us, our whole marriage. It's just been cool to see again and again and again the Lord just taking care of his own if we will commit to him. And by the way, this is not for me. So Southside is very generous to me. But just so you know, out there in pastor world, being self-employed or other self-employed people, you take taxes, you got to knock 15% right off the top for taxes, and then 10%. So if you got a pastor who's tithing, it's 25% right off the top. There's a lot in the news about all these dumb pastors, building. The last thing I saw, maybe y'all seen this, is this. It's an Instagram account called Preachers and Sneakers. And some guy has anybody seen this? Nobody. It just must be pastor's talk. It was sent to me, and it's an account exposing these big name pastors like, your Creflo Dollar and your Stephen Furtick and your, these people. And they're wearing like these $1,000 shoes. And plus, I'm like, I don't even know what these shoes are made of. But it's kind of exposing them. And that's out there. That's a reality. But the vast majority of pastors aren't that way. Most pastors, again, this is not Southside. Southside takes care of their pastors. But most churches don't. And it's really frustrating. So, sorry, let me get off my soapbox. Starting to get towards 10% and see how the Lord will work. Let me summarize. Did I put the treasure principle keys on your handout? Let's run through these. This is the back of Alcorn's book. 6 keys, and really the book is structured around these. So number 1, we hit this: God owns everything. I'm his money manager. So having that mindset of it's not that 10% is the Lord's, it's that 100% is the Lord's, and we're responsible for it. Number 2, so we manage it for him. Number 2, my heart always goes where I put God's money. That's Matthew 6:23, 24. Number 3, heaven, the new earth, not the present one, is my home. So when we remember that, it puts things into perspective. Number 4, I should live today not for the dot, but for the line. And this is an illustration of eternity, of this ongoing line versus one dot, thinking long term, basically. Number 5, giving is the only antidote to materialism. And number 6, God prospers me not to raise my standard of living, but to raise my standard of giving. And there he talks about Malachi 3, where the Lord says, test me on this. If you don't give, and I'll provide abundantly. Or even Proverbs 11. Let me read that. Y'all know I hate the prosperity gospel. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying if you give, you'll be blessed. But in general, the Lord honors those who are obedient. Proverbs 11 says this, one gives freely, yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give and only suffers wants. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and one who waters will himself be watered. And so generally speaking, the Lord prospers those who honor him with the first fruits of what they get. So that's stewarding. Proverbs 11, 24 and 25. Malachi 3:8 is another one. And probably y'all can testify to this as well, how the Lord will just provide when you commit to honor him. Hopefully you have stories in your own life, stories of you being able to meet needs, and it's a ton of fun. Any questions about stewarding gifts, any practicalities before stewarding resources before we talk a little bit about stewarding time? Big topic, hard topic. Probably all need to be pushed a bit in this area.
I don't know how to word it, but extreme poverty worldwide and what America looks like and how can I personally make a difference and what is the church supposed to do and just like even going out to eat and the level of guilt and any of that. I mean, it's like you could go crazy with it, but I mean, like just some of the books I'm reading and Compassion International and World Vision and those types of things. And sometimes I just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know why I'm here in America versus somewhere else. And I know we're in a fallen world and people experience hardships, this extreme hardship that I don't understand what we're supposed to do with it here.
Yeah, it is a little bit overwhelming. David Platt's book, Radical, anybody read that book? Was a big one that made a lot of waves. I actually think that book was a little imbalanced on what's called poverty theology, and that's kind of the idea that truly holy people will basically be broke. And I just don't think we find that in the Bible. That's where we got to have balance of God giving us all things to enjoy, 2 Timothy 4, and a lot of the Proverbs about the wisdom of saving. And again, we need rich Christians. The church needs more people that know how to make a ton of money that can then be generous. So you gotta be careful. You've got your gospel prosperity preachers that are dumb, but then you've also got your poverty theology people that think it's righteous to be broke, and it's not true either biblically. So we got to find a good balance to where we're generous, growing in generosity, growing in sacrifice. And then we look at other ways to engage the world. And there's tons of ways to engage. I think part of it is just how the Lord leads you. One of the things I'd encourage you to do as you think about giving to those types, World Vision, is to vet them really well. Sometimes they do more harm than good. There's a book called When Helping Hurts. The deacons are reading it right now. It's actually a really good book on kind of exposing some of the ways we think we're helping when we're actually not. And what true help looks like in poor areas, not just sending a check often. So it is complex, man. It's a complex world. I hardly watch the news. Part of it is because it's so complex and it can be overwhelming on what's my role in here. And I'm just a big local guy. What can we do through the local church, locally? And then missions is almost a different category than what we're talking about. Getting the gospel out to me is a different category than meeting poverty. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I've heard that Abilene, go ahead.
Well, on that note about the finding the balance. I remember when the Lord, we were always poor, that, just poor. There was, boxes of food on the porch when I was growing up. That's how we ate. And I remember always wanting for him to make me the box leaver. Let me leave, I want to leave the box. And it was a long time before that happened. But I remember walking out of Walmart feeling like I had to repent the first time I bought grated cheese. Because I thought that's for people that, that's wasteful. You should grate your own cheese,
But we put it on layaway, though. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard to be prescriptive, but in general, we ought to be thinking about it more, I think. Thinking about it more, and as again, we're not talking about, I just don't want to talk because I don't want to get too prescriptive. I want us to decide on our own heart, 2 Corinthians 8:9, when it's sacrificial, cheerful, systematic, and different people will be called to different callings. But if we're not feeling the pain, I think our whole life, I think we ought to feel the tension our whole life. Shared in here before about us currently, 5 kids, like we have no college funds. And it could be easy for us at this stage of life to justify in the name of providing for family and not give anything away. We got so much ahead of us that we could easily, and so we walk this tension regularly. Okay, here's a little bit of extra income. What to do with it? Put it away for 5 children and car insurance and vehicles and all that stuff that's coming versus give it away. So, but if we're not in that tension, having those conversations are probably not being faithful. If it's just an automatic, that's going in the savings account. That's not a place we want to be.
I was just going to mention, I think Dave Ramsey's great, but there are people who get overwhelmed by the complexity in their minds of, I'm married to one, so I understand this really well, of doing the full budget. And someone told me when we were in marriage, I wish I'd done a little better job of this, but if you can't do all that, never live on more than 80% of what you make. Save 10% and give 10%, minimum. You can do less, but if the concept of the whole budget thing is too overwhelming, that's not a bad way to start.
Yeah, that's good. We didn't hear that. Live on 80, give 10, save 10. And again, the Proverbs celebrate inheritance. I don't think my kids will have any, but. But, you also look at how often that stuff just ruins kids, And I do a lot of meetings with families at death. And inevitably, there's fighting, even among the families you would never expect it from. So I've just seen enough of the ugliness not to want to even give that a possibility. By the way, footnotes, get a will and make it easy on your kids. Go, yes, talk with W.O. Do it now. That really would serve your kids and serve the pastor as well who's doing the family. Get it done now. Take care of that because inevitably there's arguments and greed and ugliness. And
I can't count how many times people sat around that table with me and said, we didn't have any trouble till mom and dad died and there was money.
Yeah, we got family members
You see
doing
it
it.
all the time.
We had a family member that thought they should have inherited more and went to court about it and lost, I think, either 40 or 60% of what they had on the court fees. And it's like, oh, man.
I do have to do a plug for teaching your kids though, because when Skylar was 5, she got $3 a week for helping with chores. And she got half of that to spend, so $1.50 a week. Percentage-wise, as she got older and her allowance increased, both of my kids contributed mostly to their first vehicle when they got to drive, starting at 5 years old. So they gave 10%, they saved 40%, and they spent 50%. And they learned it from a young age. So that's who's the Crown Financial Ministries. So teach your kids.
it's a big deal. And in marriages, it's always one of the top 3 problems in fights. So I hope you all aren't going to go fight after this, but if you're married. All right, let's talk a little bit about, so that's stewarding resources. Let's talk a little bit about stewarding of time. I can't remember what I included in your handout, but we talked a lot about this week 1. We're only given so much. Life is short. You all know that. You feel it. It just doesn't slow down. I met with some college students this afternoon, and they were both overwhelmed and busy, and I just rolled my eyes. Well, you have more time now than you will have the rest of your life. Alicia and I, we have had, I hope, a particularly busy season. But we saw a meme the other day, and it was like, adulthood consists of saying, next week will slow down, over and over and over again until you die. So you feel that every time you age, right? It's October. It's October of 2019. We're already talking about Christmas. I mean, every year speeds up, right? Days are long, years are slow. We've got 168 hours a week. I'm doing a doctorate right now, and one of the assignments this week is really annoying, but it's actually been interesting, is I have to document what I do every 15 minutes for like the whole rest of the semester. Every 15 minutes, I got to put something in there. And so it's actually been helpful just to see, man, how am I using my time? I told Alicia, they're going to see mine this week and say, you got to quit, man. You've got to stop. Well, it's a particularly busy week, but how are we stewarding the time we're given? Time is our scarcest resource. We've got to manage it. If we don't manage it, nothing else is going to be managed appropriately. We don't budget time, someone else is going to budget your time. And so we want to be focused with how we use our mist, right? James 4, life is a mist. Just picture it. It gives us that picture. It's a mist. Hairspray. Psh. That's life, man. Ephesians 5, the days are short. Time is evil. Psalm 90, verse 12. Number your days, that we might gain a heart of wisdom. 1 John 2, the world is passing away. So we want to use our time, our free time, for the good of others and for the glory of God. A couple of tools here, just thinking about how you manage your time. And this will apply in different ways, depending on what you do and your work. But here's some few things that I found helpful and have stole from a couple books. Having the right tools to be able to use your time well. So having a calendar, now with smartphones, it's on you half the time, unless you're old school. Have a calendar, use a calendar. Information management, how do you keep up with all your stuff? I use a tool called Evernote, and I've used it now for a few years. I literally don't know what I would do without Evernote. My whole life is in there. It's just a way to store info. And so with personal stuff, with budget stuff, with vacations, with preaching, with all the ministry stuff, there's notes and notebooks, and how do you store your info? If you don't have a good system, Evernote's free. It's a great tool. It takes a little bit of time to get used to it. But have a calendaring tool, have an information management tool, and then have a task management tool. Be able to focus on what needs to get done. Increasingly, as I age, I know that if it doesn't get written down, it's just not happening. I'm just going to lose it. And so have some type of task management tool. You can have the old to-do list. I use an app called Todoist, Todoist, and it syncs on your phone and your computer. And so my workflow is I work from that. Like tomorrow, when I go to start, I'm looking at Todoist. What do I have? You can say October 10th, I need to do that. So I use tools in that way. So get the right tools to help you be disciplined with your time. Part of that is getting rid of the distraction. We talked about that with Facebook and social media on your phone and notifications. The second one is do deep work. And again, this applies to you in different ways, but this is the idea of whatever you have to do, whether you're at work or if you're doing something at home or it's your quiet time, get rid of the notifications. Use Do Not Disturb. Try to focus for longer periods of time. Fight the culture that's training us to have 10-second attention spans. Realize that multitasking is a myth. It's really not possible to do. I love brain science, and especially with technology. So I'm obviously being a fan of technology, but the idea of multitasking, there's this thing called attention residue. So you think I can bounce from that task to check my phone, or I'm on this and I'm going to check this website, and you go back and there's this attention residue, so you're just not as clear and as focused as you were before. There was a couple studies. One was HP, one was University of London, and they said when we divert our attention to like notifications or calls or text or whatever, it dings our IQ by 10% going back. So it's twice the effect of smoking weed. Hewlett-Packard and University of London in terms of trying to bounce back and forth between tasks. We're training our brains, we're shortening our spans, making it hard to focus. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. It's kind of like a self-induced ADD. So number 1, get some good tools. Number 2, focus on what's called deep work, focused work. And number 3, prioritize. So to concentrate on things, eliminate things. In your own life, as you think about finances and time, probably as important as your to-do list is your not to-do list, being able to say no to some things that at the end of the day aren't important, eternally speaking. As one has said, deliberate disregard can be every bit as important as conscious concentration. Deliberate disregard. The secret of success is the daily agenda. Own every day. Not do more things, but do more of the right things. And so as you look at your day, what are some things you can cut for the glory of God and for the good of others? Some things that are totally unproductive spiritually. And again, I'm not saying get totally extreme, because I'm not saying I'm not anti-TV, I'm not anti-social media, but in your own life, what can you deliberately disregard that's just wasting your time away? So prioritize how you use your time. And obviously the Lord and His church ought to be a big priority in that. Number 4, own your days. Again, it's kind of the same point. You take control. Just like with a budget, you take control of your money. You take control of your days to the best you can. Sometimes work doesn't allow that. But for me, a few things, depending on your kind of work, again, this may not apply at all. But for me, that means what I'm going to do is schedule my day and structure my day and be really rigorous with how my days go. So I've got a morning ritual. I'm going to do the same thing before work. Part of that's word and prayer. When I get to work, I've got this little workday startup ritual I do every morning before I jump into work. And after I do that, I cut everything else, cut out distractions. I batch my emails, and I don't take, for my work, I don't take calls or emails or hardly anything from 8:30 to noon, because that's my sermon prep time. So however that would apply to you, and I batch my emails, so I only check them usually twice a day, around lunch, and then at the end of the day when I have my workday shutdown ritual. Scheduling the week ahead. Alicia and I have kind of a weekly preview every Sunday night to see what's coming, what needs to be prioritized. The idea is you owning your day. Because again, if we just have a passive life, a reactive life, we're going to get frittered away, either by our own distraction or by other people. So we own our day, we own our calendar, we take control again, not only for the Lord, but even in your work. That way you can just be a good employee. Work hard and be productive at work. Lots more to say on that, but that's just some thoughts on stewarding time. And then again, next week we're going to talk about not stewarding His gifts, but stewarding our gifts that He's given us. Again, to summarize this, one of the things, I'm trying to help you die well. One of the things we're trying to do is have the long view, to not be short-sighted. That's the summary of all these 6 weeks. Don't be short-sighted. Think about eternity. Focus on what's going to matter in the long run. Jonathan Edwards, he was 17. He said, resolved that I will live as I shall wish I had done when I come to die. It's a good way to live, isn't it? Live so as I shall wish I had done when I come to die. Because you're all going to die real fast. It's going to happen fast. Life is so dang short. And so we don't want to be on our deathbed with regrets. We don't want to think, man, I should have been more all in for the Lord. So start now. Alcorn, at the end of that book, he says, 5 minutes after you die, just think about this for a minute. 5 minutes after you die, you're going to see the Lord in all His glory, and you're going to have perspective like you've never had perspective before. 5 minutes after you die, what will you wish you had given away while you still had the chance? We could say, what will you wish you would have used your time for? 5 minutes after you die, what will you wish you'd have spent your time doing? 5 minutes after you die, what should you have cut out that ultimately wasn't helpful to you or to others? 5 minutes after you die, what will you wish you had given away while you still had the chance? And then he asks the question, why don't you do it now? Do it now while you have the chance. So having the long view in mind, again, another way of saying that is let's just be intentional. Let's be intentional for His glory, for the good of others, with how we use what He's given us, both with resources and with time. Both are scarce. Let's use them well. A couple questions before we get out of here. Comments, stories, testimonies?
have room for generosity also, because if you're so rigid to a schedule, then you don't have time. People aren't gonna fit your schedule, they're gonna fit their schedule when they need something. And so you still have to have that margin in there, like you would your money somehow. I don't know how it works, but just to be open to the opportunity to help others, to visit with people, to be with people. But it's very difficult because people don't fit your schedule.
It's a good point, though. Best you can, have margin in your budget, have margin in your time to be open to divine interruptions.
I was listening to a guy today, and he said 90% of pastors do not equip their people to teach. They don't teach us how to die. So this is good, because you really can't learn how to live till you learn how to die.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Remembering death. Thinking about our death, and it puts everything in perspective. I was getting my oil changed, and there was a guy working, and he had a tattoo of a barcode and memento mori, which is Latin for remember death. And so I was like, thank you, Lord. I've been praying. We talked about praying. I've been praying, Lord, give me just easy opportunities to share the gospel. And I was like, there we go. Hey, I like your tattoo. Tell me about it. He said, you're the first one that even knew what it meant. I said, yeah, what do you think, man? Well, I said, and it was a good conversation. Invited him to Southside, talked about the gospel. Sorry, that was a side tangent, but yeah, for our own lives, thinking about remembering death is a daily discipline. Counting our days, it's all kind of the same stuff. Yeah, but you never know, right? Let me challenge you to try budgeting. Every dollar is really a pretty easy tool. Every dollar, you get an account, it's free. He keeps pressuring you to buy the upgraded version. You don't need it. And you plug in your categories. I think that could be one of the most helpful things for you, is to figure it out, where it's going. So that's one challenge for you, to budget. Challenge to give more, to aim as 10% to the local church would be great. And then as you go beyond, give to other causes. Missions and missionaries and vision, world vision or compassion or whatever the Lord leads you to do. I encourage you to memorize or at least meditate, because it is 3 verses, on Matthew 6:19-21 this week. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. As Alcorn says, can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead.